The resource curse, how oil and gold can ruin a country. Welcome to Money and Good Sense. Imagine a country discovering enormous reserves of oil, natural gas, gold or diamonds. You might expect that country to quickly become wealthier and that its people would benefit. Yet in practice, the exact opposite often happens. Some of the country's richest in natural resources struggle with poverty, corruption and economic problems. How can a country possess so much wealth and still fall behind? Economists call this phenomenon the resource curse. In this video, I'll explain what the resource curse is, why it occurs, and why some countries do manage to turn their natural resources into prosperity. What is the resource curse? The resource curse is an economic phenomenon in which a country possesses great national wealth, but ultimately benefits from it less than you might expect. That may sound strange. When a country discovers large reserves of oil, natural gas, gold or diamonds, it can generate enormous amounts of revenue. Yet some of these countries still fall behind economically. Other parts of the economy receive less attention. The government can become too dependent on revenue from a single natural resource, and in some countries, corruption and struggles for power increase. As a result, the population does not always benefit from the wealth the country possesses. The resource curse does not mean that natural resources themselves are the problem. The problem arises when a country becomes too dependent on its natural wealth and begins neglecting other important parts of its economy. But why does the resource curse occur in the first place? When a country earns large amounts of money from one valuable resource, more and more businesses, investors and governments begin focusing on that resource. More money is invested in extracting it. Workers are increasingly drawn to jobs in that sector. Researchers and educational institutions begin focusing more heavily on that one industry. New technologies and innovations are also developed primarily for the natural resource sector. As a result, that sector continues to grow and becomes increasingly important to the economy. At the same time, other sectors, such as manufacturing, agriculture, and technology, receive less attention and investment. This makes the economy increasingly dependent on a single source of income. That may not seem like a problem, as long as the resource continues to generate large amounts of money. But as soon as prices fall or demand declines, the entire economy can run into trouble. An economy supported by several strong sectors is generally much more resilient than one that depends primarily on a single natural resource. One possible economic consequence of this is Dutch disease, which I discuss in greater detail in a separate video. Examples. The resource curse is not just a theory. There are several countries where this phenomenon can clearly be seen. Take Venezuela. The country has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. Yet it struggled for years with economic problems, high inflation, and widespread poverty. Nigeria also earns large amounts of money from oil. Yet a large part of the population has benefited very little from that wealth. Corruption and inequality have played an important role there for many years. Another example is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The country possesses enormous reserves of valuable minerals. Yet conflict, corruption, and political instability mean that many of its people see little benefit from that wealth. But the resource curse is not a law of nature. Consider Norway. Norway also earns large amounts of money from oil. The difference is that the revenues are carefully managed. A large share is invested through a sovereign wealth fund for future generations. As a result, not only the current population, but future generations can benefit as well. So the resource curse is not caused by natural resources themselves. Ultimately, good governance determines whether national wealth becomes a blessing or a curse. How can the resource curse be avoided? Fortunately, the resource curse is not inevitable. Countries can take several measures to prevent themselves from becoming too dependent on a single natural resource. Good governance is perhaps the most important factor. When the government manages the revenues responsibly and fights corruption, society as a whole is more likely to benefit. It is also important to invest in education, infrastructure, and other sectors of the economy. This helps create new businesses, new jobs, and new sources of income. Some countries also choose to save or invest part of their resource revenues for the future. This makes them less vulnerable to fluctuations in prices. Ultimately, a broad and well-developed economy is much stronger and more resilient than an economy that relies primarily on a single natural resource. Conclusion. The resource curse shows that natural wealth does not automatically lead to greater prosperity. When an economy becomes too dependent on a single natural resource, other sectors can fall behind. This makes the country more vulnerable to economic problems. Yet the resource curse is not a law of nature. Countries with good governance, low levels of corruption, and investments in education, infrastructure, and other sectors can use their natural wealth to build lasting prosperity. Ultimately, it is not the natural resources themselves that determine whether a country becomes wealthy, but the choices that country makes. For now, I thank you for watching, and as always, don't worry too much. Everything can be overcome with study and patience.